And suffering is needed. I don't think a lot of people realize that because they hate it so much, or they hate how it might make them feel, or how things change. But I feel like in order to really value things, in order to really move on from things, you kind of have to have this really negative and low moment. And I feel like that might be a hot take to a lot of people, because it's so uncommon to really want, a negative feeling, or want, any type of suffering or any type of discomfort. But I feel like a lot of times comfort is kind of what kills our creativity. Comfort in a sense, I feel like makes you lose gratitude for a lot of things that you're given, a lot of things that you get to experience. And that's what makes it kind of really hard to accept when you are suffering, when you are in these low moments. But I feel like if we saw it differently, things would really improve. You have to realize that you change in essence. Suffering is something that we need. Suffering is this opportunity to change. We kind of can't have a great peace without this great suffering. And I feel like in that same very sense, we have to realize that when we are going through these low moments, this is definitely what makes us develop. This is now the thing that is going to change us, and kind of push us forward into the person we are supposed to be. The person that we want to be, kind of has to have these problems, because if we were having a life without any issues, there wouldn't be any real growth. There wouldn't be any real change. And in that sense, we have to really value it. You have to realize that you'd be the same person if you've never had obstacles, or anything change in your life. If we want to grow, if we want to kind of be more optimistic about these things, we can take our suffering as opportunity of growth. This is now a reason for us to improve. And this is a chance for us to really display our character. You have to realize that you handle things so differently now than you did back then, and you should keep that mindset continuing. That should be something that kind of keeps on going, so that way you can continue to grow. And I feel like a lot of people don't really want to accept that, and don't really want to move on. But that suffering is what's helping you change. The suffering is what's helping you, kind of become your own person in that sense. You're now changing these things, and wanting more for you. And I think that's something that we stopped doing, is wanting things, because we want so much, for other people in that sense. And I think that's what's making it hard to really value ourselves, hard to really say, okay, well, we're suffering, and this is going to be horrible. And this idea that you've never, you experience your suffering, but no one will ever attest to this. No one will ever relate to this. And I feel like it's so ignorant, even naive to think like that. And I feel like I've thought like that for a long period in my life. For a long time, I've had this idea that I've suffered. And a lot of times you compare your suffering to other people, and say that no one will ever suffer this much, so no one will ever be, able to know how to change. You have to realize that we all handle these things differently. We all, at the end of the day, have a choice, to move on from the suffering, to become a better person, rather than letting us negatively affect you. I feel like a lot of people have this idea that, specifically because of what they've experienced, it now negates them from being able to change, or being able to move on. When you have to realize that we're all experiencing life, together. This is all our first time living, and we're all, actively trying to be something different. If you want to improve, and start having that optimism, you have to have this idea that suffering is needed. You need this kind of low moments, or these pivotal times, to really see the person you are, to see who you really become in these moments, because now you're able to change. Now you're able to accept what's happened, and also become a better person in the end. Become something that's actually more valuable, and someone that's more optimistic to say, I've suffered, but I can change. And a lot of people don't have this idea. They don't want it to be, oh, well, you had this one bad thing happen, and I've had five bad things happen, so you'll never know what that's like. And that in itself is what's damaging us. Because I feel like, even in that sense, we've kind of become a very desensitized generation. Like, we don't have a lot of remorse, or compassion for anyone. That morality, I feel like, is kind of gone. And that's why being sensitive is so hard, because not everyone is like that. Not everyone wants to show emotion. Not everyone wants to do these things. And I feel like, in that sense, that shows why you have to be more about yourself. In the least selfish and eccentric way, you have to. You spend so much time doing it for other people. I feel like you're losing your own value. you have to start wanting things for yourself. You've been trying so hard to get other people to value these things or to become these things that you kind of lost sight of who you actually are. You know, all this effort you're pouring into people that's wasted. Why not give that to yourself? You know, why not chase yourself, your dreams, the things that are important to you that you can actively see, you know, producing right in front of you instead of chasing people. You know, these people that aren't valuing it, these people that are taking it for granted are just wasting your time and energy. You know, why not pour this stuff into yourself? Because you're trying so hard, you know, to be this person for other people that you wish you had. You're losing sight of what you want to become, you know, what you can become. You have to be more optimistic with this idea that you can change and you are worth these things. You know, you shouldn't let other people distract you from this, you know, or trying to get other people to do these things or to feel a certain way when you're not feeling that certain way yourself. You know, you have to be more passionate and more thoughtful towards yourself. That love is never going to be a loss if you're pouring it into something like yourself. And I feel like a lot of people don't really want, you know, that loneliness, that hard times, being by yourself, but it's ultimately the thing that is helping you the most, because now you're able to really see not only who you are, you know, but what you want to kind of experience in life. And I feel like that experience is something that we're taking for granted. And that experience is hard, and it's difficult, and it's honestly one of the most difficult things ever. But you have to start wanting that thing more. You know, you've tried so hard to make things in relationships work that you don't even realize it. You know, you don't kind of accept these things and want to change. A lot of times you're doing more than what you're supposed to do in relationships. You know, you've been giving people credit in relationships where you're the only reason it's working. You know, you were the one who's bending head over heels to make these things work, to make these things happen. And then when that person leaves, you question what you did wrong. You have to realize that you were the only reason that thing was surviving. You know, if only one person is actively striving and running in that race, you can still come in last. And I feel like a lot of people don't realize that, you know, that partnership, that bond that you're supposed to have isn't supposed to be something that you only attend to. You know, this is something that you both have to pour effort in. You both have to actively climb for. And when you're not getting that from someone, you try to fix it. And if you can't fix it, you have to leave. You know, don't let nostalgia or what this person might do in the future be a reason to stay. A lot of times that comfort can kind of make you kill your own self-respect, you know, your own feelings, you know, because you're just like, well, I've been with this person a long time, or I feel like this person might be able to do this in the future. You have to take them for as they are. Instead of wanting this person or this future version, want what's best for yourself. You know, before anything, that's what you have to do. And people don't want to do it. And people want to say, well, I'm miserable, so I'm going to continue to be miserable. And I feel like a lot of times we're subconsciously chasing that pain. I just wish we tried harder to value the negatives and accept the positives, you know? Because you're trying so hard to be a certain person or to do a certain thing. Just experience life, you know, and take that negative feeling and all this suffering and all these things that are making you feel miserable and see what you can do about it. You know, I feel like a lot of times we dig ourselves in that pit because we find comfort in it. But if you were trying to be something more, if you were putting yourself in this position and this idea that you had that you can get over this thing, that you can change, why not continue with that? Use your suffering as a power. You know, that is now a tool to change into something or someone new. That's what we have to do. You know, that's trying to be something new, reborn in that image. You know, if we want to have a great peace, we have to have that great suffering.